It was like a graveyard there. Just everyone was dead. I like sat down in some chair and had no idea where I was. I was like, "Where's my crew?" I was clueless, and the dude that ran the aid station came up and he's like, "Have you been drinking water?" It's like 2 a.m. I think. Yeah. I was like, "Yeah, plenty." And he starts patting my water vest. He's like, "Not enough." And so he pulls off my vest and he goes and fills it. And he's like, "Eat a quesadilla and ramen noodle." I was like, "Okay." And I remember I was like, do you have a fork for the ramen noodles? And he was like, "You ever heard of HTFU?" I was like, "No, I'm not aware of it." He goes, "It means harden the F up." Use your fingers. I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah." So it sounds rude, but mile 70, it was like the kick in the pants you needed. And then he was like, "Hey," he's like, "I tell you what, man, we already know who won the race, and it ain't you." So he's like, "But if you get out of that chair and you start walking, you got a belt buckle waiting for you." And I was, you're right. So the whole bottoms of my feet were pretty much blistered. So I blistered out and I was trying to decide, do I take time to pop them and tape them or do I keep going? One of them popped on its own. And I was like, I only have a marathon left. So I'm just going to power through. But you were on rocks, so you could feel every rock. So I just remember you'd sit down and you'd get up and all of a sudden you'd be like, you had to go through like a mental process of, I'm here for this pain. Like you just walk through it like, I accept this pain.
This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. This podcast is all about helping you run your first ultramarathon and beyond. Tune in to hear new and experienced ultra runners share how they got into running in the first place, what inspired them to run an ultra, training and race day tips, and the gripping story of their first ultramarathon. Prepare yourself to be inspired as you hear stories of grit, sometimes failure, but ultimately triumph when our guests finally cross the finish line. Hey, Eric, thanks so much for joining me today, man. I'm super excited to dive into your story, dude.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for giving me the invite. Excited to share about my journey. It's pretty great.
Sick, man. To start off, I'd super appreciate it if you just share with everybody a little bit about yourself, like your name, how old you are, where you're from, a bit about your family, what you do, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I'm Eric McConnaughey. I live in Seattle area. It's a beautiful place, part of the country. I'm about 37. So, and I've been married 18 years, which is pretty awesome. So
Congrats.
I don't have, yeah, thanks, man. I don't have any, we don't have any kids. So, someday, it's a hope, probably adopt or something like that, be a part of it, figuring out. My wife is going to school right now to become a licensed mental health counselor. So that's a lot of work, Yeah, totally. So busy. So super proud of her. And then I'm a teacher. So I teach at a school in Seattle, private school. So I teach high school philosophy and theology, which is pretty great. So I've been doing that 6 years now. So yeah,
awesome,
it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
You, you have kids that way, I imagine. Maybe you think of it that way.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you make a lot of really great connections and relationships and mentor, and it's a pretty rewarding. It's like some days you go, I don't get paid enough to do this. And other days you say, I can't believe I get paid to do this. And I feel like that's the right intersection of your passion and your work. So it's been pretty great. Love it. Yeah.
That is awesome. I am going to strive to be able to say that someday. Like my work, but yeah, do I love it? That is just the eternal battle. That's a whole nother podcast though.
Yeah.
We're not even going to do that. But that's really, really good for you, man. So you're in Washington, Seattle area. You've got some nice mountains up there. Do you do a lot of running around Rainier, or are you I don't know where else you run?
It's true. We have so many great trails, I have not spent a lot of time on like some of the best trail. Like we have the PCT comes right through here.
That's right.
Yeah, there's so many great areas. I have not spent a lot of time, and that's mostly because I'm in the city, and even though like it's an hour to a trailhead, just haven't made it out there too much. The cool thing about Seattle though is they have such a focus on little urban parks. So like all over the place, there's just these little parks with little like 2-mile loops with an ocean view. It's really beautiful. So I actually, I do a lot of training at a place. I go to a place called like Japanese Gulch, which, I mean, you get about like 8 miles connected of good trails. So there's no loss of it. So that's, most of the big mountain races are in the hills and the good ones. So I'm trying this year to get more hills in. So eventually head up there for those. But yeah.
Okay. So you've done more of the more flat is that stuff that's around you, maybe a little hilly, but
yeah. And that probably, I know when I get into it, I talk about like my training plan and stuff. It just kind of came out of time. So I had to get creative and do run commuting to work and all kinds of stuff. And so it wasn't really like a lot of road running. And then you take these little, parks with some hills here and there. I'm shifting it a little bit this year and trying to get more hills in and stuff like that, do some more mountain races. So that's what I want to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Goals.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We'll have to dive into that in a sec. But to start, Eric, why don't you tell us about how you got into running in the first place? Like if you were that high school kid or if it just came later in life like it did for me, like what's your story about getting into running?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Like high school was not a runner. So my background is I rode BMX. So went to skate parks all the time, went and dug trails, so out in the woods a lot, but I just did not run. And so I actually thought it was physically impossible for me to run a mile. Like actually, like when I met my wife and I got married, I couldn't run a mile. I thought I'd die. I mean, or just throw up, And so
same thing.
Yeah. And then I got super unhealthy at one point and just started incorporating running by playing basketball, and stuff, and lost a whole bunch of weight. And then just started getting super active. I actually, even still, I didn't really like running that much. And I remember I had a job, and the guy that was before me, in the position before me, I had heard a legend of he had run the Leadville 100. And that's a pretty burly run. And as they were describing it, I just thought he was some type of superhuman. Like I couldn't even comprehend it, which I still do. It's pretty epic. And he would tell stories of people hugging trees, crying, and they're like, someone got pulled out because they blew a hole in their lung, or I don't know. It's like all these crazy, like things. And I'm like, this sounds insane. There's no way I could ever do something like that, So then it's just in the back of my mind, and kind of fast.
And when was this ish? Like, was this a few years ago?
This had to be like 8 years ago that I had heard of this. So it's always like, I always thought it was awesome in the legendary, like you get a belt buckle,
Yeah.
And, I grew up riding BMX. So I've always been into extreme challenges, like just really like that idea. So I thought that was the most epic thing ever. So that was in the back of my mind. And then I think it was like 3 years ago, we were sitting at home and on Netflix, they had a documentary. I had to write the name of it down. I had to look it up. It was called Finding Traction by Nikki Kimball, I think it was. It's kind of an older documentary. She was trying an FKT on the long trail, I think. And I just remember watching it, and she was like, again, in the woods in the middle of the night, crying. She gets food. She's ready to roll. Like radioing ahead for bacon cheeseburgers and a fanny pack full of bacon. And I thought, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard of in my life. Like, who runs and eats bacon cheeseburgers? So I thought, I just stored away. It's in my mind. It's pretty cool. And so I would dabble in running here and there. Like I got into it a little bit, but then like a lot of people, really consistently train. And so I'd go out and run like 7 miles and injure myself and then think I'm just not a runner. So like if I go back on my Strava a few years, I had times where I started running, but then I would hurt myself. I think the furthest I'd ever run was 7 miles. Then about, I think a year and a half ago, a group of friends were doing a relay race. It's a Rainier to Ruston relay. And they asked if I would do it with them. But I was the youngest one in the group by probably like 30 years. So I had some older friends, like colleague type stuff. And so they were like, you get to do the long leg. And which was like 8 miles because I was young. So it was the furthest I'd ever run. And I remember I did 2 legs on that one and I hit a half marathon. And I couldn't believe I ran that far. And then when I have to go back like 3 months before that, before I even did that, I was into rock climbing and I sprained my ankle really bad. While bouldering, I spun, planted my foot, rolled, thought I broke it. It was just a really bad sprain. So I got sent to PT and they were like, you do PT and if it doesn't work, then you'll have to go get an MRI and maybe do like surgery or something. So I started PT and as I was going through it, they asked me, are you a runner and are you wanting to run again? Which was a weird question. And I didn't know it was like that bad. And so I was like, yeah, I want to run again. And so they got me doing stuff to get back to running, even though I wasn't a runner. And then I realized that I just am not good at keeping consistent unless I have a stupid big goal. So I just went ahead and with a buddy, my friend Chris, he was running a marathon. And I thought, well, I'll do my training if I sign up for a marathon. So I signed up for a marathon that was in about like 5 months.
Okay. So this relay was before the marathon.
Yeah. So that was my goal. Like I signed up for that. My friends asked me, you want to do this relay? I did the relay, hit a half marathon. So it was a good training run. And I could not imagine running twice that at that point. I was so sore. It just seemed unimaginable. There we go. My lights came back on. And so then I got back to training, went for it, showed up for the marathon, which was probably about almost a year and a half ago, I think. And I decided I'll go run the marathon. Now, the marathon was great. It was called the Jack and Jill Downhill, which is a really appealing name because the whole thing is like a 2% net gain or grade downhill the whole way. You start in the mountains and you run all the way down. And beautiful morning. I set out. I still to this date set the fastest half marathon I've ever run, which was a really bad idea for finishing a marathon. So I was just hyped and I went out and then, the like 18-mile wall is a real thing that I hit at 15 miles. And I just blew up. So I think I did like a 4-minute positive split on that. Like I pretty much walked out the whole last half, which was amazing. And somehow I still finished in like, I think 5.5 hours or something like that. So, but at the end of the day,
what does 4.5 split mean? I don't even know.
Oh yeah. It means that the last half of the race, my miles per minute were 4 minutes slower than the first half of the race.
Than the first half.
So I think I did like a 10-minute mile the first half, and the last half I did 14-minute miles all the way to the finish. So, which was a lot of walking, and it was hot. It was like a 75-degree. Actually, no, that day hit 81 by the time the race was over. And
that's hot.
Yeah, I'm not used to it. I'm dying. I'm not used to having to eat for that long. I'm cramping up, and you're just powering it through. But it's funny because when I'm going, I'm walking, and then I see my wife because she'd go to like checkpoints and she'd come to like cheer me on. And you start running, and then you get past it, you start walking.
I'm good.
You felt like you were walking through the shade and running through the sun to try, like you were like an ant trying to get out of the sun. It was just horrible. So I finished, I got the medal. But before I finished, someone came running past me and I was walking and they said, hey man, if you really like walking, you should just try ultramarathons. and I don't know if it was a dig or what, but I was just like
being funny.
Or maybe they thought I looked like, I don't know. So I took it as a challenge. I was like, yeah, why not? But
actually, that's what set you off, huh?
Yeah. and
part of it.
well, and so then I signed up a month and a half after that for something called the Deception Pass marathon, and that was a real trail marathon. It was like 6,600 feet of elevation gain in a marathon.
Oh,
So I went from net downhill to 2.5 or like a month and a half to 6,600 feet elevation gain. And that one I finished when they were taking down the sign. So, because I had registered myself wrong. I registered myself as a female, I guess. And so when they were radioing, there was like, there's one guy coming through, and they were like, we don't have any more guys running the race. So they started taking the sign down, and then I came running through, and they were like, "Oh, are you?" So, anyways, it was a weird.
This person,
so, yeah, my wife was like at the end, and she's like, "Do I tell them you're still coming? Are you actually going to make it?" So I think I finished. The cutoff was 8 hours. I think I had like 4 minutes to spare. You know,
whoa!
So I finished that, and I just, if I could contrast the two, like the first one was in the mountains. But I don't know, the vibe was like, people have these big, like, I don't know, big, like, jacket things to try and stay warm. They're wearing super shoes on a gravel trail. Like, there were like these cross-country kids that were just volunteering at the aid stations, and people were like taking drinks and throwing the cups at the kids, and there was garbage all over the woods. And I just, the vibe was weird. I don't know, nothing, great run. The organizers were awesome, but the people that showed up. And then I went to it was the Fidalgo Bay Marathon, and it was like a cupless race, just a totally,
this is the trail.
Yeah, total trail, chill. Just some lady was like 85 or 80 or something running it, and she was eating McGriddles, like from McDonald's while running it. And I was like, these are my people. So I got stoked on that, and then started looking up, you know, I think I was trying to find, is there an ultra marathon that, like, I really thought for some reason I should try 100-miler. And I mean, that's a logical leap, right? I mean, I just barely finished a marathon. Why not 100-miler? And so I found
totally.
So it's all like, I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself, but I ended up signing up, I think shortly after, for the Yeti 100. That was actually on the same trail as the first marathon I did. So I was like, oh, I'm familiar with it. Okay. It's just 4 times, you know, it's a lot longer. And they didn't really have like, some of the other ones, particularly up in the mountains, like you have to have completed other ultra marathons before. They didn't have it. Like, they just let you sign up. And I think it's because it's easy access. So if I went out there and got hurt, you could get an ATV to me easy. Some of these really remote ones, if someone goes out there inexperienced, it's like, it's kind of dangerous. So,
but this is sort of on like dirt roads, sort of?
Yeah. Well, it was an old railroad trail that got turned into like packed gravel. So a lot of gravel bikers out there. Yeah. Which in hindsight is horrible to run on for 100 miles.
Are you like slipping a little bit? Like
in some places it was big, but it's just like eventually you felt every rock, especially like, you know, and since it was all the same grade, there was no change. So it's just same muscles over and over. I don't know. That was my experience. After a while,
interesting.
It just got pretty painful. Yeah.
But that's the 100-miler. But there were some things before the 100-miler. Is that true?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm a teacher, so I'm all about scaffolding learning, you know, was the idea. And so I was meaning like, if here's the goal, what steps do I need to take to get there?
Very nice.
So I made a plan, and I tried to I listened to a whole bunch of podcasts, you know, and tried to think, what do I need to know? You know, and I was really inspired by it too. I remember listening to Courtney Dauwalter was interviewing in one, and she was just talking about how, because she was a teacher before she went into professional running, and she was talking about she'd do lunch runs, and she'd do all these other things, like how you get creative. And she mentioned that teachers are good at scaffolding learning and being mentally strong and good at making decisions, because that's like what we do all day. And so I was like, I don't see why I can't do this. Maybe that's crazy. Maybe it was just wise. I don't know. So I set a plan, and the things I knew I needed to learn was I didn't run through the night very much. So I was like, I need to get used to long hours in the night. So the next race I did after the Fidalgo Bay Marathon was the Bridle Trails 50K. It's over in Kirkland, Washington. And it starts at like 7 p.m. in February. And so...
Oh, dang, let's go.
Yeah, and it's just it was like you could do relays or you could do a 50K. And it was like a 6-mile loop that you just kept doing. So I was like, sweet, it's a loop. Elevation gain's not too bad. And I'll get used to running at night. That race went good. I finished... I wasn't trying to destroy myself because I wanted to keep training after that.
Right.
So.
Oh, can you help us understand the timeline of this too? I remember that being an important piece of your story. So this trail marathon happened when?
Yeah. So, okay. The trail marathon happened in, October. But before that, my first marathon happened in August. Or no, it was I think it was July. So July, October.
Of 2022?
But the time, is that right? 2022. Yeah, so 2022, I ran my first marathon in 2022, July of 2022. And then I set the goal. And so then I ran my first 100-miler in June of 2023. So within 1 year, I did my first marathon and then the 100-miler.
Yeah.
So,
jeez.
Yeah. So it was a little bit, it was quite an on-ramp. So
it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess, the one thing I did talk about was it wasn't like I went from being completely out of shape. I did a lot of biking, just not running. So like cardiovascularly, like my body was strong, that type of stuff. But I did not. Running's a whole different animal, but I'd worked a few things out nutrition wise. Yeah. I had done a 100-mile bike ride 2 years before that. So I kind of you do learn some things that are crossover. So, but it was still my first marathon.
Yeah. Okay. So with this 50K, when was that?
That would have been February of 2023.
Okay, so we're getting 50K. Close because June is going to be your 100-miler.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear most of the folks on this podcast, are preparing for their first ultramarathon, right?
Yep.
So I'd love to hear in as much detail as you can recall. Well, before that, I'd like to know
how I got ready for the 50K.
Yeah, what training looked like. Thank you.
Yeah.
And nutrition, nutrition planning. And then we can get into I'd love to have you recall everything you remember about the 50K race.
Yeah.
But tell me about training.
Yeah. So the thing you might know, so that race was in February, which means that my training was through December and January in Seattle, which is just wet and disgusting and dark all the time. And so I started, I just had to get super creative. So that's when I started doing some run commuting. And I would do sometimes where I would ride my bike to work, then run home. Then the next morning, run to work and then bike home. And I live 6 miles from work. So, so that was a pretty good run. And so I'd planned that. I just started thinking about I don't even know that my training was super solid leading up to it, but there's a lot of things that are just the intangibles, like just moving, I would intentionally on my long run day. So my wife would drop me off for work on a Friday. And then, I would intentionally not sit down all day. And so you teach 8 hours. I don't sit down. And then I lace up my shoes and do a 14-mile run home. And even though it wasn't a marathon, which is what I would end up doing for the 100-miler for a training run, it was still it was awful. On a Friday, you're tired and you do that. So I think I just got, and I also, I started doing this class called strength training for runners. And I just learned and at this point too, I'll talk more. I was kind of shooting in the dark. Like I had some strategy, but I didn't completely know what I was doing. I just knew strong bodies finish races and they don't get injured as easily. And so I just tried to keep moving. I did the strength training for runners and it was very aggressive. There's a place called Experience Momentum here in the area. I say like after doing 6 of those classes, I think I had to buy new pants because my legs were too big. So, hey, that's a great problem to have. So I just had like strong legs, and I mean I build muscle pretty easily, but still,
that's incredible. How many days a week was that?
It was just 1 day a week, but between that and running, 1 day a week. I mean, it was a 1 hour workout, and oh man, I wish I could like a bunch of split squats to run to Bulgarian split squats to deadlifts to like all single leg stuff, particularly a lot of single leg stuff, focusing on the idea that because when you're running, you're on your one leg, back and forth. So
that makes sense.
A lot of that. So I really focused on strength training, which was beneficial, and just tried to stay consistent. I don't know that I really hit more than like a 25. I think I led up to like a 25-mile week was my highest. And then I just knew like I'm going to walk a lot during this 50K. And I think I completed it in like a 7:30 or something like that. The cutoff was like 9 hours. So I was happy with that. But I just tried to, the food, you asked about food. That was the other thing.
Yes, definitely. Well, you maybe include nutrition in the story of how the 50K went. But I think that was a great summary of the training you did. Thanks for the weight training points. Like, we all should be doing some weight training, right? Like, that's a great thing to add in. I don't, but I should.
I haven't been consistent now, and I need to get back into it. Yeah,
it's so hard. But that's awesome. So tell us how the 50K went from when you woke up. I mean, actually, this was later at night. So like before you started the race, how were you doing? Were you feeling good? Like, then tell us how the race went, like all the details you can recall.
I think I remember being super stressed, and it was weird because you're like, it was on a Saturday. And so I slept in, I got up and like went and hung out with my wife and like tried to take a nap, but it doesn't really work.
Jitters.
Yeah. So I showed up, I was tired. I felt, I remember showing up, and I think this does happen to some people too. You're like, do I belong here? Like, did I put in the training? What am I doing here? And especially in those races, the thing that was weird was since it was a relay happening at the same time as a 50K, there's a big difference between people that are running a 5-mile leg with their cross-country team and people like me trying to do a 50K, just in body composition, and speed. And so I think I just tried to, like, it was a mental game, and I just tried to really be like, I do think that's something that comes with being in your later 30s. You start to get a little bit more of, who you are and you're comfortable with it. Does that makes sense? Because there were some fast dudes, and you could tell, like some people I know started the 50K and they tried to keep up with these 5-mile relay people, and they blew up too soon. So I just was like, I'm going to run my race. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And so I was in the back of the pack, and just chilling. And that went well. So I didn't give in to the nerves too much.
Good job.
And then that really helps. If you can slow it down, you can eat more, So, if you start going too fast, then you get behind on food. So it was a 5-mile loop, and every time I'd try and stuff my face with, they had hash browns and quesadillas and a bone broth. It was a cold day, so that one, February. I hadn't had a lot of experience with a ultramarathon smorgasbord of our like aid stations are pretty eclectic. And so I just would show up and look at something. And I was just trying to shove stuff in my face, and I was figuring it out, So,
okay. Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So there's like all this awesome food. It looks amazing. You're hungry. You're super hungry because you're running this super long race, but you probably didn't eat this while you were training.
Right.
Did it sit well with you? Did it work out?
I did, like, partway through, I think I started feeling a little sick, and then I realized that like gels after you've been running 4 hours it's just hard to keep them down. And so I started going to like fruit. They had a lot of fresh fruit. I learned on that day that I loved oranges. And I think I almost ate a whole tray of oranges,
Dang. All right.
And chips. I just somewhat listened to my body. I mean, I didn't train eating a lot, which was something that I picked up later on. But the one thing that I think I did do was when I started training for the 50K, I remember, because like I said, I had before like dropped 50 pounds, which took a lot of discipline in what I ate. I ate super clean.
Nice.
So when I started training again, I was like, I'm going to go back to eating super clean. But then I was listening to some podcasts, and I like that works for some people, but I was like, I kind of need to, the thing I've got going for me is I kind of have like a garbage disposal of a gut. Like I have a tremendous ability to turn junk food into energy. And I remember when I was eating clean, I couldn't eat anything outside of my diet or I got sick. And so I just decided I'm going to be burning these calories anyways. I'm just going to keep eating. So actually when the build up to the 50K, I just ate like so much food. I gained weight. Not just muscle, but my gut got a little bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was right or not, but it worked for me. So when it came to that race day, I was still testing stuff out, and I figured out real quick some things worked, some didn't. But I didn't have a super sensitive gut. I had a gut of steel. If that makes sense. So, so I learned on that one that I tried a bunch of new foods, but I think the thing that I figured out on that race was one of my superpowers was that I could just eat. I could eat a lot of food. So
that's awesome. And you could eat a pretty good amount at a time without like getting like, I don't know, side aches or sick. Like you could, because that would be my worry. I think even if I knew I was comfortable eating that food, like, this food won't make me sick, but will the amount of food make me sick?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I do get side aches. And you just kind of ride the wave a little bit and push it. And then they just hadn't really, and some people just really struggle, but I don't think in the training that I did for the 100-mile or that whole build-up, I don't think I threw up once during a race or anywhere else, which I guess I don't know if that's a badge of honor, but that's pretty impressive. Because I regularly around here, I'll run, and in the middle of a run, I'll swing by my favorite burger joint, and I'll get a burger, a fry, and a Coke. And my claim to fame is I can put it down while I run a 12-minute mile. And hopefully I keep running. So I just kind of trained my gut to just eat like food. So I don't know. So anyways, that was
so cool.
That was what I learned. That was what I learned in that one. So and that was the goal, was the 50K for me. Yeah, I could not believe it. I was so stoked. I think I changed my Instagram handle immediately to ultra runner, because you're just
that's right.
Yeah, you're like, I'm an ultra runner, even though it was like, 50K is no joke, but I saw it was still a part of a bigger piece. So I left a little bit in the tank, if that makes sense, because I didn't want my recovery to be too long. So, yeah.
Can I ask you, when you got to the finish line, how are you physically of the 50K? How are you physically? And first, how are you physically? Then I'll ask another question.
I would say, so it's funny. Well, one of my friends showed up with like was a double quarter pounder meal, like at the finish line for me. But I had pushed so hard on that last couple miles that when I got there, I was nauseous. Like I just couldn't really, my by the time I sat down, and it was like my mind knew that I wasn't pushing anymore. I just kind of felt a little dizzy, a little faint, needed some water. You know, my wife was like, "Are you all right?" I'll be fine. You know, and physically, I didn't have any blisters or anything. I was thankful for that. Trying to think. I had some aches and pains, but I made it through pretty unscathed on that one. I felt pretty good in that arena. So
nice. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So physically, and I finished, I sprinted towards the finish line, which would make it look like I was running fast, but before that I was crawling pretty much. So, but you gotta look good at the finish line. So, but yeah, right. It went well. I felt it was confidence inspiring, if that makes sense.
Good. So you felt like emotionally, you also felt like you were in a good place.
Yeah, 100%. I felt good about it. People were super stoked, So yeah, it was and the cool thing too, the finish lines. Yeah, ultra runner. The cool thing too is the finish line. Like there really is just a difference. Like I finished a marathon, my first one. It was like a 5. Whatever. It's just like you finished in time, but there's kind of like, I feel like sometimes gatekeepers that are a little bit like, if you can't finish a marathon in this amount of time and you have to walk, you shouldn't do it, And I don't know if that's true or that's just something I put on it, but I have some people say that. But this was like, you finished, you're an ultra marathoner, congratulations. Like the stoke was pretty high. And so I think I found like my community, it was a really great time. So
I love that. I just want to comment that I really appreciate that about the trail running and ultra running community, because I felt the same way in my first marathon. I haven't done my first ultra yet. My first ultra is in August, so it's coming. But my first marathon was in January. And yeah, it was like talking to people before we were getting going. Everyone's like, yeah, I'm shooting for a 2-hour, 30-minute marathon. And I'm like, why am I talking to you? You're like on a whole nother plane than I am. I'm like, I want to get this done. I want to shoot for 4 hours because I want to have a goal. But also I really just want to finish it because this is a step for me to get to the ultra. But yeah, it was like this high pressure, don't stop culture at the marathon. So I'm really look forward to like experiencing this difference in the ultra running community, and
I'm excited for you to
laxness.
You said it's in August.
It's in August.
Yeah, man, you're gonna crush it. I'm excited for you. Then you can put ultra marathoner in your.
That's right. Sometimes I'm like, I run an ultra running podcast and I haven't done one yet, but it really puts me in a good position to like.
Hey, you're doing
empathize with my audience, so that's what I tell myself.
You're getting such a great. Like I was listening to all these podcasts before from people who are experienced, and I had a hard you had to sift through. Some of it was amazing advice, but like what actually speaks to me where I'm at. There's kind of this like. I'm not finishing a sub 24 hour, 100 miler. So and most of the time they distilled that, but like you're getting it from the people that it's fresh and they trial and error. So I think this is a really great way to go about kind of learning. It's
well
cool.
said.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Selfishly, that is a great thing about this podcast for me is I get to talk to all these people, but then unselfishly, this is what I wanted, like as I was learning for my ultramarathon, and what other people I think have wanted too. So it's like, I get to make this thing so other people can hear some down to earth, not Courtney to Walter stories, because those are awesome. But we need to hear some stories from Eric. We don't know Eric. Like no one, like I've never met Eric before today.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be inspired. I already am inspired by your story, and it's way more approachable, which I like.
Yeah, that's sweet.
Well, thanks for explaining your 50K story. And this was overnight. I don't think we even
we didn't get into that.
About that fact.
A quick tip too off of that. One thing I learned is headlamp and lighting. but I'm glad I figured out on that before I tried something that was overnight. And that was because I bought a headlamp from REI. I always buy stuff from REI because I can return it.
Yes, same.
I got through it, and the way it pressed on my head in a certain way,
Ooh,
it kind of gave me a headache.
interesting.
The battery didn't last as long as I thought it was going to. And at one point I had that and a handheld torch, like a little running torch. And I was going through one of the last laps, and I made the decision not to change out a battery on the hand torch. And it started doing the blink of death.
Oh,
which is like, I still had like 3 miles to go, and I'm in the middle of the woods. And so I had to kind of like light the trail and then turn it off and run. And then light the trail and turn it off and run.
Terrible.
And then I came skirting in, and then I popped some new batteries in the handheld torch. And the last lap, I didn't have my headlamp anymore because the battery died. So I went and traded it in, and a lot of people have their favorite ones. I use a Black Diamond that has rechargeable battery packs, so I carry those. But then it also, when those die, you can put AAAs in it. So it's kind of like you always. And then I also carry like one little like tiny headlamp with me also. That's like stuffed in my pack always as an emergency. It also has an SOS beacon on it, interestingly. So it's like a backpacker one. So I learned that was I don't want to be in the middle of nowhere without light. So I was glad I figured that out in the 50K. I wouldn't have thought about that. So yeah.
Later, that is so true. And you finished the race at like what, 2 a.m. or 3?
Yeah, see, if it started at 7 and it was how many?
1 or 2?
Yeah, I guess it was 2. I feel like maybe it started at 5. I guess it would have been a little bit earlier. Maybe it was like 4 even. I'm off of my times. I just know you got halfway through the first lap in the sunset. So if it's February, that was probably like it started at like 4 or 5, and you get through the first half, the sunset. So I think I finished about midnight. Was close to time or something like that. So
be exhausted.
Yeah.
Exhausted.
And the thing too that was different was when I finished a marathon, I was immediately hungry. Like I remember sitting down, and that's why my friend brought me the quarter pounder from McDonald's, because after the marathon I ate it, and I remember I looked at my wife and said, I've never tasted a burger better than this in my entire life. And like no one has ever said that about a McDonald's burger. But it was just like, it was that good because I was so exhausted. But then I got back after the 50K, and there was something like, I've just learned sometimes I'm not hungry. Like my nervous system shot after a ultra marathon, and I have to force feed myself and then take a break. So that was a new experience. So I couldn't really eat that much afterwards. And then I woke up. I woke up that next morning, like I went to bed, and my regular thing has been I'll sleep for like 3-4 hours. So then I'll wake up and make a big bowl of macaroni and cheese and just dump tons of salt on it, and for like maybe chop up some hot dogs and put it in there. For some reason that just hits a spot, and then I sleep like a baby. So you just kind of learn, but that so it was just a different, your body pushed itself so far that it just responds differently. So yeah.
Cool, dude.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that story and those tips. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you've done some other things. We've already mentioned you've got this 100-miler that you did. I think that's probably what you need to talk about. But I know you've also done some others. I'd love to give it to you and tell us about what you've done since the 50K in February.
Yeah, right. So you finish your first one, you're super stoked, and you figure, why not me, right? Or I can't. I think the difference was I thought it was unachievable. Like I know you had mentioned like the stories of like Courtney Dauwalter stuff, like all that stuff, like they sound so like that's unrelatable or unachievable. And then like I'm not elite necessarily, but at the same time, it's like you realize like, oh, I mean, yeah, if I did this, I could do that. And so I think you change your perspective. And so the next thing I did, I knew since I had already signed up for that 100-miler, there was at a park here in Seattle called the Dizzy Days, and it's a Green Lake Park. It's a 3-mile loop, and they did a 12-hour run on a 3-mile loop. So I signed up for that, and I was like, I want to experience 12 hours on my feet. So I did that. I hit 42 miles. So that was my next step in the training. And that was a good experience. I learned what blisters feel like to run. And I learned, better sock management, wool socks, all like wool blend socks all the way.
All the way.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, and then, I learned about switching shoes. I learned about eating more whole food. I ate a ton of pizza on that run. Like, cause after you're out there long enough, you have to start eating pretty solid food. So that was a great learning experience. And then I recovered from that for a little bit, and I just kept.
When was that one again?
That one was in March. So the 50K was in February. That one was in March.
Boom. Okay.
So pretty close.
Yeah.
But then March, and then I had a solid training block to June. Like the mid-June was my 100-miler. So April, May, June. So like 2.5 months. What I ended up doing was I was kind of at that point. So I knew I hit 42 miles, but I did not really know. I was so tired. I was like, how could I possibly go for, 58 more miles is just ridiculous. I think at that point too, even my wife was a little bit like, are you sure you're going to be able to do this? I saw how tired you were after 42 miles. And she had confidence in me, but it was a valid question. And I ended up, I'll narrate the story, but there's a local shoe shop, Seven Hills, here in Seattle. Shout out, great shoe shop. And they put a raffle up for a coach, like enter this raffle, win a coach, Andrew Miller, his coach. You win a month of free coaching from Andrew Miller. So I entered my name and then put in there, like, I'm training for this. And he ended up reaching out to me, and I got 1 month of free coaching from him. He was the youngest. He was the youngest person to ever win Western States. So Oregon local, pretty, like, I think he was 18 or something like that. Just quite a resume of just like solid, great guy, epic runner. And it's just started
18 years old?
Yeah, 18 years old.
And he finished Western States?
Yeah, it was the year he beat Jim Walmsley on that year. So,
what
no small. So it was a big, like, and I saw that and I was like, I think he knows what, and that was the thing, right? Was all the information that's out there, sifting through it and finding what works. And also with my schedule, right? I'm teaching him. I technically work like 2 jobs, and how do I fit all this stuff in? So I'm trying to.
You mean between your teaching and like ultra running? It's like 2 jobs.
Well, no, I also.
Or do you actually have 2 jobs?
I'm a pastor too at a small church. So.
That's awesome.
So I'm
totally demanding.
I guess I missed saying that part. Yeah. So it can be a lot, and I'm like trying to fit it in and make the best use of my time.
Goodness.
And so I ended up connecting with him, and I just sent my training log, what I've been doing. And then I talked with him, and he made like a plan that fit with my schedule really well. I felt like I wasn't spinning my wheels anymore, I had not been doing any speed work. And so he got me doing tempo runs once a week, which really, I think, helped my running form. He got me doing something that I hadn't thought about, which was practicing walking efficiently. And so like, even in the runs, like I remember I'd go out and it's funny, my students the other day, cause they're super into running. One of them asked me, what's my mile PR? And I said, it's like a 7. I looked it up on Strava. It's like a 7:20,
Yeah,
and
like
they were
nothing.
like, oh, okay. And then they were like, what run were you doing on that? And I pulled up, I was like, oh, that was on a 17-mile run. And they're like, you set your mile PR on a 17-mile run? That's ridiculous. It was because my training was, I ran some trails and I found a downhill spot. I know it sounds funny, but I found a downhill spot and I bombed. I bombed down the hill as fast as I could,
fun.
Blew up my legs. There was a burger joint at the bottom. You'll see a common theme. I like burgers. I grabbed the burger
Seriously.
and then I walked up the hill as fast as I could while I ate a burger and then started running again. So it was like my training was trying to simulate, I suppose you could say, like what to experience. And so anyways, I learned how to walk super efficiently, because even the person that wins the race walks. So there's no rule against walking. So you need to learn how to walk well.
Yeah.
And so I learned
Smart.
then, I had a few superpowers, and it was that I could blow my legs up, pull out my trekking poles, and still walk about a 15-minute mile pretty consistently for a long period of time. Well, that's a respectable pace. So anyways,
Totally is.
So I get to the 100-miler, and I showed up, and you just don't really sleep the night before. Like, sleep was awful. I think I got like 3 hours of sleep. You're tired. So really, sleep was more important the week leading up to it. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So then I showed up. I had a crew. I had some friends, a father and son that have been friends. Shout out to Todd and Taden McDonald, came out. They volunteered. They drove up from Idaho to drive through the night and cook me food, at the different aid station, just like saints, just the greatest dudes ever. And then I got two people. I had one of my buddies, Sean, who came and ran 32 miles through the night with me.
Whoa.
And then my friend Chris was my finisher. He caught me with 8 miles left. And so my plan was the first half of the race, or the first quarter of the race, was downhill. It was actually the course of the first marathon I did.
That's right.
So I knew it. And so the strategy that I worked with my coach, Andrew, was just run it. Like, run it good. So I actually still set a 6-hour marathon in the 100-miler, because I ran down the hill, and then I get to the bottom, and here's Todd and Taden. They got some bacon cheeseburgers, and what I always wanted was what I saw Nikki Kimball had in that one thing, was a bacon fanny pack. So they gave me a fanny pack full of bacon. and I turned around and I pulled out my poles, and I basically sped hiked back up the same hill that you went down, was the way the Yeti was. So you ran down a hill, you turned around, you went back up. It was a 2% grade. It wasn't bad, but you get to the top, and by the time I got to the starting point, I was at like mile 47. And then you go through the starting point, and you go to a city called Cle Elum. So, which is at mile 70, different direction. Right. So you kind of go north, or I guess you go on it, you end up running west, and you turn around, you run east, you run through, you go all the way east, and then you turn around, you run west, and then you end where you started. It's just one straight path. So
interesting. Back, out and back.
Yeah. So by the time I got to the original start point, I just hit the furthest I'd ever run. And it was like, it's all new from here. So I just kept going. And at that point I started incorporating a run walk strategy. So I'd run a little, and I think I was doing I'd walk about a 3/4 mile and then run about a 1/4 mile. So I just kept doing that for a while. And then I made it through to mile 70, which was a turnaround point. And mile 70 is a really critical one. It was like a graveyard there. Just everyone was dead. I sat down in some chair and had no idea where I was. I was like, where's my crew? I was clueless, and the dude that ran the aid station came up, and he's like, have you been drinking water? It's like 2 a.m. I think.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, plenty. And he starts patting my water vest, He's like, not enough. And so he pulls off my vest and he goes and fills it. And he's like, eat a quesadilla and ramen noodle. I was like, okay. And I remember I was like, do you have a fork for the ramen noodles? And he was like, you ever heard of HTFU? I was like, no, I'm not aware of it. He goes, it means harden the F up. Use your fingers. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah. So it sounds rude, but mile 70, it was like the kick in the pants you needed. And then he was like, hey, he's like, I tell you what, man, we already know who won the race, and it ain't you. So he's like, but if you get out of that chair and you start walking, you got a belt buckle waiting for you. And I was, you're right. So I started going. At this point, I think at mile 60, the whole bottoms of my feet were pretty much blistered. Because I made a bad choice to switch to a pair of socks that weren't wool. And I was wearing gaiters too, and I think it held in anyways, it was a bad choice. So I blistered out, and I was trying to decide, do I take time to pop them and tape them, or do I keep going? One of them popped on its own, and I was like, I only have a marathon left, so I'm just going to power through. But you were on rocks, so you could feel every rock. So I just remember you'd sit down, and you get up and all of a sudden you'd be like, you had to go through like a mental process of, I'm here for this pain. Like you just walk through it. Like, I accept this pain. I've experienced worse pain. And I remember before we were kind of talking, the thing that I learned was, life hasn't necessarily been easy for me, and so a lot of the resilience I learned to get to where I am now, I applied to the race. Sally McRae, I listened to some of her stuff a lot, and I think she says like, ultramarathons or real life is easier than an ultramarathon. Or no, ultramarathons are easier than real life. That's what it is, because you can DNF, you have aid stations. Real life, you just got to keep going. And so I just kept reminding myself, like, I don't want to do this again, which later I did want to, but at the time I was like, I'm not. So I've always been mentally strong. So I just kept pushing and sticking with it. And then, I got to where I had 8 miles left and we were really pushing the cutoff. And at that point I had to keep a 15-minute mile to finish in time with 8 miles left. And I had run 92 miles. And so my buddy Chris picked me up and everyone was telling him, like, you can't let him drop. You can't let him drop. So I actually had convinced myself, your mind does funny things. I convinced myself that if I passed the finish line, past time, they'd still give me a belt buckle. I was like, no, they don't care. They're cool, man. They'll give it to me. And I think my other people are like, you're delusional. So Chris set a timer, and every like 20 minutes he force fed me a gel. And so, because I was depleted, and he actually lied to me. He told me that I was going slower than I actually was.
Genius.
And so he was like, your watch isn't doing it right, and kept telling me, so kept motivating me. And I think I ended up finishing like doing like a 13-minute mile for those last, or something, maybe a 14. I can't remember, but it was fast. It was at least faster than what I needed to. So I finished at 29 hours and like 48 minutes, I think. I remember I saw the finish line and just couldn't believe it. And I just yelled out real loud. And I ran what felt like a sprint, which was an impressive like 10:30 mile for the last mile. I just ran it out and finished, and then was just stoked. So got the belt buckle, and the Yeti's super cool. The guy that runs it, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He's there. He hugs every sweaty, disgusting person that finishes, cheers them on. It was like emotional. You see people crossing, people are crying. If I remember right, the dude that finished was sitting there. That one was like, took a nap and then was sitting there drinking beer and eating pizza, cheering people on. It was kind of it was like a pilgrimage. It was just a whole cool experience. And so I did that.
How did you feel?
Well, thing I learned was, I actually felt pretty good. Like my legs were pretty buckled. Almost fell into a chair. People were like helping me, and I had to go to the bathroom, and that was really hard. There also wasn't a lot to do there. It's like super dehydrated, had to start drinking water. Thing that someone at the finish line gave my wife, because my wife was great. She like went and asked someone that had done a lot. I was like, what advice would you give to someone who just completed this? Like, I'm going to have my husband home. What should I expect? And they said, what was it? Compression socks. So we went and bought compression socks, like diabetes compression socks.
Right.
And because my ankles were blown up, like just massive. My feet were so big from swole. So I put those on, and those helped. I got home, and that night I remember my legs hurt so bad. I should have saved. I have this picture. It looks like an intake picture, like I was on drugs or something. But my wife took me. I was sitting in the bed when I got home, and I couldn't move. Like, I had to have her come pull the blanket off of me so I could roll over because the blankets were too heavy on my legs. It was crazy. Oh. And then the next morning I like get up, and I think the important thing is motion is lotion. And so my wife would be a good PT. She was like, I want to get you food and clothes, but you have to move. And so she gave me a walking cane that I had from when I sprained my ankle. And the next morning she was like, I'm going to work, and when I get home, I'm coming back at lunch, and you need to have walked the house 6 times, taken a shower, and eaten food and get dressed.
She's
So
training you.
she was training me. And so I did that. And then like the next day walked around the block. And then I went out, great thing, went to like a massage therapist that does dynamic, or like special type of stretching to help kind of loosen up and massage like 3 days after, which was awful and painful, but then I could walk.
I bet.
Yeah. And then like the day after that, we went to Mount Rainier and stayed on top of Mount Rainier at this little hotel. I went on a couple like 3-mile hikes, you know.
Wow.
It was hard. Like it was really hard. My legs were really blown up, but I think the blisters on the bottom of my feet stayed for about a good solid month after. That was what was most torn up. And I learned, so pro tip that I did was I got petroleum jelly, or bag balm is my favorite, bag balm, and I would cover the roof of the blister and then KT tape over it, so to where it was around the side, so it protected the roof, because if the roof comes off then it was really messy. And then it just kept the KT tape on there, and eventually it just kind of healed from the inside. And I think about 2 weeks after that, I went out and did like a 5-mile run. So that was a pretty quick turnaround. But so I recovered from that well, but then I stopped training consistently, and then ended up injuring myself. So consistency is key. And I was like, well, I'm still in good shape. And I was sounds weird. I was working on my car and I tweaked my back. And then the next day I went and ran a marathon in the city. They had this thing called the Dick's Burgers-a-thon. And it connected 5 different Dick's Burgers, and you had to eat the menu while you ran a marathon.
That's your thing.
It was like, I was born for this. So it was a memorial. Yeah, it was like a memorial jam for these 2 twin brothers. One had died. And so they did a memorial jam because the brothers had done that together one time. So, you know, you eat like a deluxe burger, a cheeseburger, a fry, a milkshake, and a special. And you had to,
Dang.
It was pretty gnarly, but since I had hurt myself, that was pretty bad. So I ended up getting sciatica for like 2 months, to the point of where I was like, I tweaked my back and my piriformis pinched my nerve, and I was like drinking coffee on my floor on my knees, and because I couldn't sit.
Did you have sciatic pain from sitting?
Yeah, like just shooting down my leg all the time, throbbing sciatic nerve down my leg.
That's so funny, because I have several friends in their 30s, 40s that are having sciatic pain right now.
Yeah.
From lots of different things. One of my friends has diabetes and he isn't able to move much, so I don't know, this is like a complication on top of that. My other friend's super active, like personal trainer, and he's getting sciatic pain. He like tweaked his back or something too, and like for 2 months he was like, I can't sit, I have to stand.
Yeah. I mean,
jeez.
Yeah,
I
guess in hindsight, I probably, if I can't touch my toes without shooting nerve pain, I probably shouldn't run a marathon. But I did it anyways. And so I've kind of learned after the 100-miler, I think I felt invincible, and I learned a lot. You know, actually the month before that, it's funny, I went back, and so before I did that one, I tried the Fidalgo Bay Marathon again, which was that October trail marathon, because I just love it. It's a beautiful place. I wanted to do it again. And I ended up DNFing at mile 13 because I was just sick. Like, went out and did it and didn't pace well. So it was weird going from, he ran 100 miles to DNFing a marathon. But just kind of, it was humbling, but I was actually just proud of myself. Sounds weird, but I just kind of, like, at some point I was like, this is not my day, and I'm sick. I think I actually had COVID. And I couldn't get my heart rate below like 160 while I was walking. And I was like, this is just, I just said, I'm good. I'm just going to sit on the beach and enjoy the day. And I think it felt a bit of like, I think, you know, sometimes I heard someone say one time, our greatest strengths are often driven by our greatest insecurities, which is kind of a deep thought. And so like, why, I think people have all kinds of weird ideas for why do we want to run? Why would I sign up for 100 miles? And, you know, I don't know. why would anyone want to try something like that? It me somewhat. I mean, you do get a lot of praise for it. And it's pretty cool to talk about it, and it was a self accomplishment type thing. But I think I just realized like I'm content if I, like I'm happy, I'm content with who I am, and I'm good. So it sounds weird, but I felt okay with DNFing. I felt like I entered a new mindset. And then, then I did that Dick's One Burgers run, and then had 2 months of injury. I ended up going to a doctor they said I had a degenerative disc. They did x-rays, and it's like sports physio was like, I asked him, I was like, will I be able to run? And he said, I told him I had signed up for like a 50K, and he was like, do you not have anyone that loves you that would stop you from doing that? so I found a new doctor, and ended up going to a guy that combines chiropractic with PT and massage. Anyways, it got me moving. And so most recently I did a 12-hour run at Carkeek Park locally, and I just ran to 50K. It was on a 2-mile loop with 450 feet of elevation gain per loop. So it was pretty gnarly. And so I did that, hit a 50K, called it a day. It's a good training run. My body's doing great. I'm a week out, and I'm currently training for another 100-miler, but I'm trying to land on one because I have some schedule conflicts type stuff. So anyways, that's my kind of story. Yeah, that's my story. And it's been pretty awesome. So
yeah. And what 100-milers are you looking at? Probably.
Well, I was going to do what's called the Lumberjack 100, which is over in Port Gamble here. It's a pretty cool local one.
Washington.
But then since I injured myself, my training's a little bit not where I want it to be, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
So I put that on pause. Then I was looking at doing one in September. It's like the Ultra Series. I'm actually currently trying to enroll in a doctorate program that would start at that time. So I don't think I'm going to be doing that. So anyways, I got a few got a few plates spinning here. And then, so my backup plan is if there's also what's called like the Strawberry Fields 100, which is down in Southern Washington. Strawberry Fields Forever 100 in June. And then if not, then my backup plan is there's a local trail run. It's like a Japanese Gulch. It's an area I had mentioned it before. The guys that live around there had set up some thing where they set up an 11-mile loop, I think it is. And if you do a 100-miler, it's unsupported. They actually have a belt buckle you earn. It's called the Gulch 100. So kind of a cool thing. I don't think many people have done it. It sounds kind of crazy, but that'd be cool to do just in case I can't figure out one. So anyways,
man.
So I got to figure it out. So yeah, but
getting back out there.
Yeah.
Post injury is hard, but good for you for keeping going.
Yeah.
And thank you. I just want to thank you for sharing your story. That was fantastic. From trail marathon, marathon, 200-miler in a year. That's fantastic. I mean, if you can do it, then great. And you did. And if any of y'all are thinking about doing it, you can. Eric did it.
Yeah, man. I'm kind of convinced that I think, if it's a little bit of discipline, a little bit of wisdom, I think a lot more people can do it. It sounds crazy, and it is, but it's it's possible. So we'll see. You got your 50K coming up. You might just decide to try 3 of those in a day at some point, So,
but really, and I appreciated what you said earlier. At one point, you said something along the lines of like you just start believing in yourself, like after you've done enough things. Like for me, I'm confident I'll be able to finish this 50K. There was a point where I wasn't sure, like with the marathon. I wasn't sure that I could run a marathon because that was twice as long as the half marathon I did. But I think after the marathon, I was like, I literally can do any of these. It's
Yeah.
literally just putting in the time.
Yeah.
Like 100-miler, you just got to put in the time on your feet and you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
It's like, and you may DNF the first one. There's always there's weird circumstances that happen sometimes, like you being sick with COVID during your marathon. That happens.
Yeah.
But honestly, you can do it. You just got to
Yeah.
put in the time. And that's what's sweet about ultra running is, it's relatively simple. Put in the time. There are some things like blister management and socks and shoes, and you figure that out. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right. Like I told someone, it was like, how'd you do 100 miles? It's like, well, I ran 800 miles last year so I could run 100 miles, right? Because I hit 900 miles on the year. And so it was kind of this idea of this, like, it was 800 miles of training so you could do the 100 one day, which is crazy to think you did that percentage of your run in pretty much one day. But I do think like you believe in yourself, and you also get people that believe in you also. That changes it. Part of I started working with my coach, and for some people, for me particularly, that was helpful, right? And part of that was that he believed that I could do it. It also was comforting to my wife, who was like, "Are you sure you can do it?" And I was like, "Well, Andrew says I'll be just fine." So she's like, "Okay." So like it did bring, and so like when you're in it, you're like, just trust the training, stick to the plan, because usually you panic, think nothing's going to go right, things always go wrong. So you stick to the plan, stick to your training, trust that you put in the work, and just be mentally strong, and then you end up seeing results. So yeah, and that's life, right? That's life too. So was it Ann Trayson said 100 miles is like life in a day, all of life's trials and tribulations in one day. It's a great quote. So
I think I've heard that one.
Yeah, it's a great quote, really resonates. So yeah, so whether it's 100, now they're doing 300-mile races, which is insane. But it's all ultra marathons, and it's I'm excited for you to be knocking that one out of the park and stuff. So I'll
thanks, dude.
Keep looking out for it. Yeah,
I'll keep you in the loop. Follow the podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll have somebody interview me on the podcast probably for that one, so we can flip it around.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Should.
Yeah, and let's keep in contact, keep in touch, because I want to know whatever this next 100-miler you do, if you end up being the crazy person to do is it Cocodona 240 or something, or there's a 241 out there?
Yeah, it's a Cocodona 250, and then they have 250. Yeah. I mean, realistically, I think long term I want to do a 200-miler, but it requires a few more backcountry skills. So I'm scaling it, so I'm gonna go backpacking with a buddy, try and hit a few more miles and just start figuring it out. So we'll see. It sounds appealing. We'll see where we go from here. So yeah.
Sweet, Eric. Yeah. Thanks again for hopping on and sharing your story, man, and looking forward to see where you go.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, your host Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you personally for listening to today's episode. As someone preparing for my own first ultramarathon, I've found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. Whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or somewhere else, make sure to follow or subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. Also, make sure you check out the show notes of this episode. There's a link to sign up for the Ordinary to Ultra email newsletter, to join our Facebook and Strava groups where you can meet other people striving to run their first ultra marathon, and see any links that our guests may have provided as well. Thanks again, and we'll catch you in the next episode.